Welcome back. Let's learn about the basic percent equation. Alright, so over the last several lessons, we have focused on developing skills for solving basic equations, but now we're going to start looking at some of the applications of being able to solve these basic equations. Specifically in this lesson, we're going to look at the first of these applications, which is to use something known as the basic percent equation. And the basic percent equation, as it sounds, deals with percentages of numbers. It can help us answer questions such as these right here. What is 25% of 200? What percent of 50 is 30? And 20% of what number is 5? These three questions, or these three problems, can all be solved using the same equation, which is the basic percent equation. And it looks like this. The basic percent equation says that P times B is equal to A, where P represents a percent or percentage, B represents the base, or the number that you want to take a percentage of, and A is the resulting amount. It actually represents a percentage amount of the base value. All right, and a nice way to remember this equation, or the order that these letters go in, is think of the sentence, peanut butter is awesome, right? P for peanut, B for butter. The equal sign translates to the word is, and then A would stand for awesome. Or if you're allergic to peanuts, you can think of the A as being awful. Peanut butter is awful. Either way, both sentences can help you remember the basic percent equation. And so now that you've been introduced to the equation, let's actually use it to answer these three different questions, or to solve these three problems. For our first example, we want to know what is 25% of 200. Okay, so what we want to do for this problem is actually translate this sentence into the form of the basic percent equation. Each of these different parts, the percent, the base, and the amount, P, B, and A, can all be found within this sentence. We just have to identify each part. And the first thing that I always like to try to identify is the percent. That's usually the easiest thing to find in the sentence. And that is the case here. 25% is clearly the percentage for our equation. So I'm going to underline the 25% there. That is our P. But then what else do we have here? Well, it's going to be very common in these problems where we want to use the basic percent equation that you will need to translate a word into an equal sign and another word into a multiplication sign. And those two words are more often than not is and of. We know from previous lessons when we learned how to translate sentences into equations, as well as translating sentences into variable expressions, that the word is refers to an equal sign and the word of refers to multiplication. All right, so is represents an equal sign and of represents a multiplication sign. And then something that happens pretty much every single time in these problems is that the base, the value for B, will always come after the word of. All right, so 200 is going to be the value of the base. We're going to be taking a percentage of 200, which will be the base. All right, so 200 is B. And so all that leaves us with is that the word what we're trying to find here, the value that we don't know, must be A, right? Because we have P times B, that would be this part of the basic percent equation. That must be equal to A, the unknown amount. So that's what we're going to have here. That word what, or the value we're trying to find, is A. All right, so then if we set up the equation here, we're going to have A, which we don't know, is equal to the percentage, which is 25%. And in the equation, you always want to write the percentage as a decimal. So in this case, 25% as a decimal is 0.25, right? Whatever your percentage is, just move the decimal place 2 to the left, and you'll have the equivalent decimal form of that percentage. So that's how I get 0.25. The decimal was here, but then we move it 1, 2 to the left, so we get 0.25 or 0.25. All right, but then that percentage will be multiplied by B, which is 200. So we have 0.25 times 200. All right, and so now we can solve this problem by solving this equation. Our unknown value is A, or the variable in this equation is A, and all we have to do to solve it is simplify this side of the equation. right? A is already isolated. It's all by itself on this side of the equation. So there's really not much work for us to do here. We just have to take 0.25 and multiply it by 200. Now you could do this in a calculator if you like, but I am going to show you the work by hand here. What I'm going to do is rewrite 0.25 as a fraction. Remember that when you have 0.2 decimal places, such as 25, like we have here, you can rewrite that as a fraction of those two numbers divided by 100. So what we would have here is A is equal to 25 divided by 100 times 200. And so then from there, you could take 200 divided by 100, that's just 2, which will give you that A is equal to 25 times 2, which is 50. And that would be the final answer to this problem. 50 is 25% of 200. All right, and so that's it. We have now solved the first of our 3 problems, and so let's move on to the second one. Hey there, real quick, before we get to the next part of this lesson, if you find my tutorial videos here at JK Math to be helpful, then I'd like to invite you to join my membership site, JK Math Plus, where you get access to many perks, including bonus content and my exclusive community. The bonus content includes dark mode versions of my videos, extra example problems, and more, while the community is a private space online where you can post questions, have discussions, and study together with me and other members. To learn how to join and see a full list of everything you get access to as a member, you can head over to jkmathematics.com/plus. I'll have a link for that in the description of this video. So if you are interested in becoming a member, feel free to check that out. It's a great way to support me and the tutorials I make, as well as a great way for you to learn math better. But for now, let's get back to the lesson. For our second problem, we want to know what percent of 50 is 30. All right, so now this problem is worded a little bit differently compared to the previous one. That might be because we're solving for a different value in the basic percent equation. But we'll see. Let's try to translate this sentence into a basic percent equation. Again, I always like to start with the percentage first. And looking at the sentence here, we aren't given a percentage, right? We are asked to find it. It says what percent of 50 is 30. All right, so in this case, the value we don't know is the percentage p. Then we have the word of, which we know translates to multiplication. And then after that word of will pretty much always be the base b. So in this case, that means 50 would be the base. All right, so 50 is b. And then the word is refers to an equal sign. And then after that, we just have 30, which in this case will be the amount a, right? Because we have p times b, that has to be equal to a. So 30 must be our value of a. All right, so let's set up our equation here. We don't know what p is, the percent. So keep that as p, but then we're going to have p times b, which is 50. So we have p times 50, and then that will be equal to a, which is 30. So we have 30. All right, and so now we have set up the basic percent equation. In the previous example, we were solving for the amount a, but in this case, we will be solving for the percent p, because p is our unknown value. P is the variable in this equation. So what we want to do is isolate it or solve for it. And right now, p is being multiplied by 50, so what we want to do is get rid of that 50. Technically, we could rewrite the equation like this. We would have 50p, or 50 times p, is equal to 30. And so 50 is the coefficient of the variable p, so we can divide both sides by 50 to get rid of that coefficient and solve for p. All right, so we're going to divide both sides of the equation by 50. So these 50s will cancel out because 50 divided by 50 is 1, and you'll just be left with p is equal to 30 divided by 50. All right, so we get p is equal to 30 divided by 50. You can reduce 30 and 50 by a factor of 10. 30 divided by 50 would be the same as 3/5 because 30 divided by 10 is 3 and 50 divided by 10 is 5. So you could do that here. P would be equal to 3/5. So we have a fraction answer for our value of p, but we do want a percentage. We want to write it as a percentage. And the easiest way to do that is to just multiply the value that we found for p by 100. All right, if you multiply that by 100, you will get the equivalent percentage for that fraction. And so simplifying 3/5 times 100, you can divide 100 by 5, 100 divided by 5 is 20. So what you'll be left with here is 3 times 20, right? Because if 100 divided by 5 is 20, you'll just have that 20 times 3. And 3 times 20 is 60. So we get 60% as our value for p. Or if you want to write it as a decimal, that would be 0.60 or just 0.6. Okay, and so that is the answer to this problem. We wanted to know what percent of 50 is 30. Well, we have just found that 30 is 60% of 50. Okay, that is the final answer to this problem. And so that answers our second question from the beginning of this video. But now let's take a look at our third and final question with the last example for this video. For our third problem, we have 20% of what number is 5. All right, so once again, the wording of the question is a little bit different compared to our previous two examples. So it might be the case that we're solving for a different part of the basic percent equation. But let's take a look. Let's try to identify the different pieces of the equation. The first thing I always like to look for is the percentage, which I can see right here. We have 20%. So let's mark that down here. That is P. Then we have the word of. We know that that word represents multiplication. And then what comes after the word of will be the base. In this case, what comes after the word of is the phrase what number. So because we're not given a number there, that means that the base value is unknown. All right, that phrase what number is referring to b, the base, but we don't know what it is. Okay, but we do know that 20% of that base is 5, right? That's what this sentence is saying. 20% of what number or what base is 5. And so that word is represents an equal sign, and then that number 5 would have to be the amount A, right? The result of P times B. And so now we have identified all the different pieces of the basic percent equation. So let's put them together and actually write out the equation. In this case, P is 20%, which you could write in decimal form. That would be 0.20, right? Just move the decimal place 2 to the left. So we go from 20 to 0.2, and then you'll be multiplying that by B, the unknown base value B, and that will be equal to A, which is 5. So we have 0.20b is equal to 5. All right, and so now we have set up our basic percent equation. This time around, the unknown value is B, that is our variable, and so that's what we want to solve for here to answer this question. All right, now B is being multiplied by a constant of 0.20. So what we want to do is get rid of that constant. We're going to want to divide both sides of the equation by that value to isolate B or get B by itself. But before we do that, I am going to once again rewrite the decimal as a fraction. I just think that makes it easier to work with. It will make solving these equations by hand a lot easier. Surely you could divide both sides of the equation by 0.2, and you could put 5 divided by 0.2 into your calculator to get the answer. But if you're going to solve this by hand, I would recommend rewriting the decimal as a fraction. And 0.2 or 0.20 would be the same as 20 divided by 100. All right, that's how you'd represent 20% as a fraction. So you'd have 20 divided by 100 times b, and that is equal to 5. Now, you could reduce this fraction. Both 20 and 100 can be divided by 20. 20 divided by 20 is 1, and 100 divided by 20 is 5. So you get 1/5 b is equal to 5. All right, now if you're pretty familiar with decimals and fractions, you may have it memorized that 0.2 is 1/5 as a fraction. But just in case you were not, I wanted you to see where that fraction of 1/5 comes from. But now that we've done that, this equation becomes pretty easy to solve. Rather than having to work with decimals, we can now solve for b by simply multiplying both sides of this equation by 5, right? Technically you're dividing by 1/5, but that would be the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of that fraction. And if you flip the numerator and denominator, you'd get 5 divided by 1, which is just 5. So we can multiply both sides of the equation by 5. 5 times 1/2 is 1. So you have 1 times b, which gives you b is equal to 5 times 5, which is 25. That is the value of the base, or the whole number, from the basic percent equation. All right, 20% of 25, the base, is 5. 25 is the whole number, and 5 is part of that whole number. Specifically, it is 20% of that whole number of 25 that we found. Okay, and so that's it. We have now solved this problem, which means that we have now answered all 3 of the questions from the beginning of this lesson. And so with that, that is all I had for this lesson. But if you do want to get some more practice solving problems that involve using the basic percent equation, feel free to check out my examples video for this topic that I'll have linked here on the screen. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. But if you don't have any questions, this is all I had for now. So I will see you next time.